Welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to be continuing on with our core data tutorial series, and in this particular tutorial we are going to be taking a look at how we can create new instances of our core data entities and then store those in our core data store. So let's go ahead and get started by talking about the app that we're going to be working with in our SwiftUI project. And then when we're done with our SwiftUI project, we're going to move on to UIKit/AppKit land. The way you create core data objects is exactly the same in both areas. However, the way you go about implementing that code depends entirely on your core data setup. So if you're using a data controller, for example, that code would go in the data controller. If you're not using a data controller, then that code would go elsewhere. Just depending on what your project architecture is. As long as you can access the code to create new objects and all that stuff, it should be okay. So, we're going to put this inside of our data controller in our core data project with SwiftUI. And then we're also going to do the same thing in UIKit/AppKit. Again, you don't have to in SwiftUI. You could say put it in the view or something like that as a method. However, that isn't ideal for larger scale applications. So let's go ahead and get started by taking a look at our create project method that I have here. This method takes in a couple things. It takes in a name. It takes in a date, so which is the date it's expected to be closed. And then we have a Boolean determining whether or not it is closed. And then the method returns a project. As we move forward, you'll see why. And then we also have a create task item method, which takes in a couple things there as well, and returns a task item. So let's get started by filling in our create project method. So inside of Xcode, let's go ahead and get started by retrieving our managed object context from our persistent container. And we can do that by saying let context equals container dot view context. So now we have our main managed object context that we're going to be working with. Next, we can create our project object. And we can do that by saying let project project, and then we're going to pass it a managed object context. So that way core data knows which managed object context to associate this project object with. Okay. So, why is giving it the managed object context actually important? Let's see. All right. Okay, let's fix this here real quick. So, project, pass it a context of context. Okay, so the reason why this is so important in this particular part of our code here is because you may be working with what's called a background context. And when you're working with a background context, if you try to save the changes in the main context, obviously there's not going to be anything to save. So you have to merge the two contexts together and all that sort of stuff. That's more advanced core data stuff, but it is fundamental to understand that there can be multiple managed object contexts, and if you're not using the right one, you'll get unexpected results. So that's why our objects need to be passed that managed object context so it knows which one to be associated with, because there can be multiple. All right, let's go ahead and configure our project now. So we'll say project.project ID. We'll set that equal to a new UUID. Let's see. There we go. Okay, then we'll say project name equals name. Okay, so the code is being uncooperative again. So let project okay, there we go. That should be fine now. Okay, there we go. Let project equals project, context. Okay, there we go. Now Xcode will stop yelling at me. At least it should. Okay. After our project name, we'll say project.project expected close date equals, we'll say distant future. Excuse me. Then we'll say project.isClosed equals is closed. Well, actually, for our expected completion date, we need to use the one that we pass in. So expected close date. All right. Then we'll say project created at equals now. Project last modified at equals now. Okay, and that is our project. However, we're not quite done yet. And the reason for that is because we need to call save to save our changes. And if you recall, our save method has a do, try, catch, where instead of the do block, we try to save our context by calling the save method on our managed object context, and then we catch any errors and just crash everything. But again, in a real world app, much like I mentioned before, you're not going to be doing that. You're going to be, say, returning a Boolean or throwing the error to the method's call site or something like that, depending on how you want your app to work. You're not going to be just crashing the user at every opportunity you get. That wouldn't be a very good user experience, and people wouldn't download your app. So let's go ahead then. And we'll say save. Like that. Now we also need to return our project. So we'll say return project. There we go. All right. Next, let's create a task item. Here, we'll say let task item equals task item. We're going to also pass it a context. So we'll say let context equals container dot view context. and we'll pass it context. Just like that. This is going to be the same process that we've gone through, to be clear, for our project. So if you want to pause the video and try it yourself, you can. Otherwise, you can keep following along here. So before we continue, let's take a look at the parameters that we get here. So we get a title, we get an expected completion date, we get whether or not it's completed, and then we get the project that the task item should be associated with. And that is where the return type of our project comes in. So our create project method returned a project. Well, when we call this method, we're going to assign it to a project object, and then we're going to pass that project object to this method. So when we create task items, when we call this method, those two will be related. All right, so let's go ahead and now say task item dot task item ID equals UUID. Task item dot task item title equals title. Task item dot task item expected completion date equals expected completion date. Task item dot is complete equals is complete. Task item dot let's see. We have is complete, we have expected completion, we have title, we need task item created at equals dot now. Task item dot task item last modified at. We'll set that also to be dot now, like that. And let's go ahead and double check just to make sure that we have everything we need. We have is complete. Yep. Yep, we have that. We have that. We have that. Yep. Okay, so we have everything else that we need, but there's one problem. How do we associate a task item with a project? Well, this is pretty simple, actually. So, do you remember how I mentioned when we took a look at creating our data models that when we're talking and creating relationships, that relationships are they use NS sets, and how there's a bunch of stuff that Xcode generates for you related to that? Well, this is where we use one of those things that Xcode generates for us, and it will have an add to project, or that kind of thing. For, say, you're on the one side, but you want to add something to your many side, then there you go. But in this case, because our task item, right, is on the many side, we need to tell it the one side of the relationship. What project should it be associated with? We can do that by saying task item dot project equals project. Now, if we go down into our create project method real quick, I want to show you that add to task items method that Xcode generates for us. So above our save, we'll say project dot add to tasks. So here's our add to tasks method. There's also a remove from tasks method that gets generated. And it does exactly what you might expect. It removes a task item from from the set of related tasks, right? So you can see this method here. This will take in a task item, but because we're not taking in a task item here, we're not using that. I just want you to know that methods like these are there for you to use. All right, so I'm going to fix that up there. Okay, now let's go back up to our create task item method. All right, the last things that we need to do are call save and then return task item. Let's see. We don't want new, we want now. There we go. All right. And then we're going to have this also return something. So we're going to have it return a task item like that. Now, in the way that we're going to be using this, we're not necessarily going to use that return value, but if, depending on how you structure your code, you might use it. So I'm going to keep it in there. All right. And those are our methods for creating our core data objects. Pretty simple stuff. Let's go ahead and go into our data controller. Or, well, actually, no, not our data controller. We're already in our data controller. We want our content view. There we go. And we're going to create a couple methods here. So we'll say private func create sample data, like that. All right, and so this is the only method we're going to use here. I know I said a couple, but we're only going to use one. All right. And what we're going to do inside of this create sample data method here is we're going to create 5 projects, and each project is going to have 5 tasks associated with it. So how do we do that? Well, we first start by setting up our for loop. So for I in 1.5. And then we'll say let project equals data controller dot create project. We'll call this project I. Expected close date will say distant future is closed. It'll be a bool.random because I don't want this to be the same every time. I want there to be some randomness to the closed state for now. Okay. And there's our project. Next, we're going to have another for loop inside of this for loop here. This will be for creating the task items. So for j in 1.5. There we go. Here we'll say let task item equals data controller dot create task item. And then for its title, we'll say task J for project I. Expected completion date, we'll say dot distant future. And then is complete. This will also be a random Boolean. And then for the project, it'll be project. There we go. So you can see where that return value came in here. We're passing the project we created earlier in the outer for loop. We're taking that and then we're passing it into the create task item method in the inner for loop. All right. And there we go. We should be good. Now we just need to have a button actually execute this method. And then, so inside of the action closure here for our button, we can say create sample data. Just like that. Now, let's go ahead and run our code. I want to make sure that my run destination is correct. Yeah, my Mac, we're good. Run. Okay, we have a build failure somewhere. Okay. Yes, continue. Xcode. Okay. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to comment that out. And then we'll have text. We'll just have it be some empty text. It's fine. Okay. And then we'll save it, run our code. All right. So here's our application. We can see we have a list of It may or may not be populated with anything, depending on if you've tried to experiment. So you can see we do have a single project in here. But that's fine. And you can see here that we have our heading. If we go into our heading here, you can see we also have a button to add a task. And that's precisely what the header view is supposed to do. But if we insert our sample data, you can see our list becomes a lot more populated. Right, so we have our project 2. And then we have our tasks. Project 4. Project 5. Project 3. Project 1. And then we have our other project down there at the very bottom. And that's great. that's how we can create data, insert it into core data, save it, and then display it to the user using SwiftUI, all thanks to the fetch request property wrapper, which detects these changes. That's great. However, there's one small thing, and that is sorting, because right now everything is really discombobulated. In another video, we're going to cover how we sort our data using what's called an NS sort descriptor. But for now, that is how we can create data in our in core data using a SwiftUI app. Now, let's move right on over to UIKit and AppKit land. All right, so here we are in our UIKit app. If we run the application as is, this is what we get. I have an application with a table view and a button. The table view is empty, but the button is beneath it. And when we press this button, we should generate some sample data. Right? It's literally that simple. So what I want to do is I want to go to our data controller here. And inside of the data controller, we're going to get started. All right. So in our UIKit project, we're dealing with something a little less complicated in terms of the number of properties, but it still uses the same process we went through before. Except in this project, we're dealing with to-do lists and to-do items. All right. I'm going to uncomment all of that. There we go. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a to-do list. So inside of here, first thing we want to do is create a managed object context that we're going to associate with our to-do list. It's the exact same way we did it previously. Let context equals container.view context. Now you can see the create to-do list also returns something. So it'll return a to-do list, and it takes in a title and details. So what I want to do here is we'll say let list equals to-do list, and then we will pass it our context like that. Perfect. Then we'll say list dot to-do list title equals title. List dot to-do list details equals details. List dot, and let's see, we should, okay, we're good on the to-do list. It just has a title and details. We'll call save, and then we will return list. just like that. All right, next, let's see, we also need a create to do item method. And what this is going to do is it's going to return a title, or rather not return, it's going to take in a title, some details, whether or not it's completed, and it should also take in the to-do list to associate it with. So we'll also pass it a to-do list, and then it's going to return a to-do item. So we'll say we'll say item equals to-do item. We're going to need to pass it a managed object context. So we'll say let context equals container dot view context. And then we'll say context, pass it the context like that. Now we'll say item dot to do title equals title. Item dot to do details equals details. Item dot completed equals complete. And then we'll say item dot, let's see here, we need list equals to-do list. Just like that. All right. Next, we need to save and then return item. Just like that. All right, and we're good to go on our data controller. You can see, again, it's very similar to what we did in our SwiftUI project. The next thing that we need to do is we need to actually populate our table view with our core data, data that for when we actually insert that into our core data store. So let's go ahead and go into our view controller here. Right here we have our action method, and this will be a fine place for what we want to do. Now, one thing I will point out is that the way I have this structured is that in the table view, each section will be for a to-do list, and then inside of those sections will be to-do items, assuming all goes well. So, much like we did in our SwiftUI project, we're going to create 5 to-do lists, and each of them is going to have 5 to-do items. So we can do that the exact same way that we did previously. We can say for I in 1 ... 5. We'll say let list equals data controller dot create to-do list. To-do list I. we'll say this is some test details for to-do list I. And there we go. Then we will create it. We'll create the to-do items for the to-do list. So inside of the for loop here, we'll say for j in 1.5. We'll say let item equals data controller dot create to do item. And then for its title, we can say to do item J for to do list I. Details will be this is some details for to do item J. For the completion, we'll say bool.random. And then to-do list will be list. Okay, there we go. However, we're not done. And the reason why we're not done is because the table view doesn't just reload its data on its own, like the list in SwiftUI does when we have our app fetch request property wrapper. We need to tell our table view explicitly to reload the data. And so to do that, we can say table view dot reload data. Now, assuming all goes well, we can save this, run our code. We have a successful build. And here we are. Let's insert sample data. And you can see here now our table view becomes a lot more populated. So, inside of the heading here, for the heading, we have a title of to-do list 1. And then all of its to-do items. To-do list 2, all of its items. To-do list 3, all of its items. To-do list 4, all of its items. To-do list 5, and all of its items. All right. Now, if we, much like with our SwiftUI app, we can close this and then rerun it. And everything persisted. All right. And that is great. Now we know how to create items inside of core data and how to save them and then reload our table inside of UIKit. Now, again, if you're, again, the same thing applies for normal table views in AppKit, where if you add core data stuff and you want to you want to show the new stuff in your NS table view or your collection view or something like that, you have to manually reload it. It's not going to be like SwiftUI. So with that, that pretty much does it for this video, guys. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.